a lot going on that's transformation, and that I think is important to distinguish what's happening amongst the libertarian audience and what's happening more broadly in the general public. When you look at what's happened in the last years, the things that I'm known for, mass surveillance, the rise of a more authoritarian, militaristic, police-oriented state, and what we have now, I think what we see is we see a array of gates being ordered around us, where things that in the past would have been a choice are no longer being made to be a choice, because these routes that we all depend on are being controlled. Now, this is really interesting, I think, in the libertarian mindset, because, of course, property rights are really central to it, and there's this idea of sort of my way or the highway. But what happens when the highway that we're talking about is the public commons? What happens if it is sort of the artery through which we must all pass? And we are told that we are sort of being represented, that our voice is being heard, that we have a vote. But our votes are being diluted, our voices are being hidden. Our influence, our impact is being suppressed to the point that a nominally representative system is not representative in fact. When you look at the political systems that exist today, like January and everything that's happening, when you look at the routine use of emergency measures, emergency laws, must-pass legislation, what I think we see is we see a suppression of the public voice. I think we see a suppression of the public interest and a replacement of that with something much worse. I'll get into that later. But what I want to get back to is what we've lost, which is this idea, and I think what libertarians recognize. This is, congratulations on your 50th anniversary. Okay. Now I know you can hear me because the chair is so loud. I want to say freedom implies choice. It implies agency. It implies self-direction. At the same time we do that, we're struggling with a world that is trying to scale. And the response of the institutions that exist today is to try to order the world in such a way that it scales comfortably, it scales easily, it scales frictionlessly. The question that's not asked is, for whom? And I think the problem is that institutions are doing very well. The general public, the average person, sitting there listening right now, who made an effort to come out here to be a part of something, to try to do something. The people who are in comfortable positions will remain in comfortable positions. But just like a game of musical chairs for the rest of us, every round of play, we lose more chairs. And there's not a lot of concern for what's happening to those people. Now, the idea is in order to pass through these gates, to engage in society, to cast your vote, to do whatever, you have to be granted permission. Now, what does that really mean? We all know, somebody stamps off, it's okay, you can do this. But think about the word at a more structural level. The etymology of the word permission is, so elementary, what it's invisible. The prefix per in permission means through, as in to perspire, through our skin, when things pervade, when they permeate, when they perforate. And the latter half of that word, the mission, you might recall elsewhere, as in classic cases that evoke the sense of movement, it symbolizes most clearly. Transmission, or emission, would be slightly more poetic and darker invocation from the wonderful gentleman who spoke to introduce me here. In the medical context, the return to silence of remission. And I think most centrally to the political context as we see it today, the origin of submission. Move yourself beneath. Now, the two halves of this word permission originally mean movement beyond Yet in this modern application of the word, we're talking about the exclusion of movement, or more precisely of possibility, the limitation of agency. Now, that movement beyond in the ancient world of today, beyond what are we moving? And these are those gates that I mentioned before. Where did they come from? Who placed them there? That gave the ability, the authority to indulge or deny our collective human impulse to adventure is the avatar of modern government. I would say more purely the modern state. This is what makes a state a state. Is to apply this authority as widely, as broadly, as publicly, as obviously as they can. And I think that impulse, that governing impulse that has become a popular impulse, that has become the omnipresent sort of symbol of government or of being in a well-ordered society today, stands in opposition to the natural or unpermissioned state, which we call liberty. At its core, all our myths and poetry are in the language of liberty, struggle in my mind to communicate that fundamental meaning of it. Freedom from permission. That is what liberty is. It is the ability to act without asking, to speak and to write, to do and to be yourself without getting a paper stamped, without submitting yourself and a completed form alongside it to some central authority, to some higher being, right? And I'm afraid that many of us, particularly who are more interested in this style of thinking, have forgotten that the only intended limitation on liberty is the protection of liberty for others. And this brings us back to that idea of consent negates and who wants to gates, right? Whoever you are that's listening to this, I want you to think about the broken system that you see in the world today, and what you see happening across this broken planet. And ask yourself, did you agree to this? If we live in a democracy, if we belong to a sort of representative state, does this represent your will, your family, your community, even your state? And lawmakers that sort of comprise the majority of the sort of binary super party today, they would say it doesn't matter, right? The police would say that you don't have a choice, the law is the law. And Facebook would say that you actually did consent. But I don't think you did, and not in any way that matters, it's material. The reality is today they pretend that we consent, they pretend that we agree because of where we were born, or because of where we had no choice but to live, or simply because we had to click OK to continue when we opened our phone. So it took down the box the first time. You can't use it. You have to go through all the rigmarole. You have to sort of click all the buttons, scroll all the way to the bottom, get end user license agreement. They call it click wrap. What it really is a sort of digital form of handcuffs. And it's not in commerce, it's everywhere. And that's not consent, not in any way that matters. I think what we say, what we feel, what we believe, what the user, or more realistically, what the used want to see in the world, that matters too. That has to have weight. But increasingly it doesn't. And that makes me wonder, how did we get here? The root of our problem, in my thinking, is that we put forward our sort of idea of what a country, what a nation, what a government should be in a particular way, at a particular time. Government, the state, as it was envisioned, was to be a champion of the common weal, right? The growth that we all benefit from. Wealth, of course, derived from the other word, weal. It's not about money, it's about more, it's about the welfare. And the welfare of the state is being made to replace, in the minds of many Americans and people around the world, regardless of language, regardless of nationality. The state, the welfare of the state replaces the welfare of the people. Our institutions, we are supposed to identify with, they are supposed to symbolize, they're supposed to represent us. But when they reach a certain level of complexity, when the members of these institutions begin to identify themselves as an internal and separate class, they become apart from us. They become less representative of us than union of us. And I think this is not by accident. I think this is an intentional sort of act. It's happened slowly, in part, almost by accident, by chance, by one and two, and then it infiltrates the thinking of a faction, and then it infiltrates sort of a caucus, and then it infiltrates a party. And then collectively, these parties work together to form that class, and that class takes control of the state, and that state takes control of everything. Because they slip sort of the leash that was supposed to hold them back, that was supposed to connect them to us. And our very language has been corrupted to suppress this understanding that the state works for, at the smallest level, the person, that the commonwealth, the common welfare, the sort of state of the nation is derived from the state of the person, of the individual. And yet, the idea that the person, the individual, is what matters most is being corrupted and suppressed. And it is being replaced with the institution. Now, merely suggesting this idea might bring to mind examples of you thinking about our language and how it's changed the way we talk about things. Public safety has been replaced, for example, by national security. Concern for the household income in political debate is given way to talk about gross domestic product in the pages of the economists. The freedom of speech has become, for many, a thing to be feared, with the voice of the individual being degraded every night in every living room from the television set, as a poisonous well of disinformation rather than the cornerstone upon which this national project was founded. So as long as this acid strategy of enforcing popular submission to the institutional prerogative of the day is executed slowly enough to avoid alarm, we're doomed. That's the common narrative. That's what we're told. The boiling frog that we all know about. By the time anyone notices, to pick an example that couldn't possibly happen in the United States, militarized forces patrolling the domestic interior, our government buildings, for your safety, the government will simply say that, of course they are. Isn't it obvious? It's normal. This is the way that they've always done it. This is the way it will always be. And don't get your history books out. Don't cite, what happened in the past to us. That's whataboutism. It is extreme. It is radical. It is non-normative to object to these long-established policies, right? Now take off your government shoes and walk through a scan. This is not the way it always was. This is not the way it always has to be. But these things will not be changed for us. Progress is not granted to us. It's never a gift of history. It is something that is fought for. It is something that is won as a consequence of a long and painful struggle, often that involves a lot of sacrifice. When you look at our civic health today, I think you all feel something in the air. And I'm not talking here about the civility discourse. I'm not talking about policing, this or that way to talk to each other. That matters. We should be kind. Calling somebody by whatever they want to be called is, that is a kindness. It costs you nothing. You can't be forced to do that. At the same time, there's no reason we should be willing to do it if we know better. Right? And yet, there's a new kind of language, a new national anthem that's being written around us that is not voluntary. It's one that's sung daily in the streets of every city. We've all heard it, we've seen the videos. And the words are simple, you already know them. It's short, it's snappy, it's catchy, you never forget it. It goes, stop resisting. And I think there is no less American phrase in the English language. More frequently now in black, if you notice, than in blue, that I find the evidence of an effort to impose change on a national character that I do not remember from when I was young. No, I was not the most politically aware kid. I'm still not, sort of a professor of political theory. You guys can argue 71 different flavors of non-aggression principles. But in the last 10 years, I have been told, in regard to what we could politely describe as a related topic, that people just don't care. That's why things don't change. Yeah, their rights are being violated. Yeah, the government broke the law. Yeah, these guys are criminals. And yeah, they'll never see them inside the courtroom, but they don't care. Nobody cares. That's a lie. It is the lie that we hear. It is the lie that we tell ourselves to rationalize our lack of power, of agency, our lack of ability to resist, precisely in the manner that we're being told to stop even thinking about, stop conceptualizing as possible. Because we are, in fact, a nation born from an act of resistance. What the great institution of the Crown had called an act of treason. And each of us right now, observing the state of what is happening around us, to say that nobody cares, we are deceiving ourselves. I care. You care. And all of the people that you think don't care, they care too. And we care strongly. We simply believe that we don't have the power to change it, even though we know that we have the right to change it. What distinguishes, I think, the libertarian movement and party from sort of the binary super party is that whether we're looking at Republicans or Democrats on the north, south, east, west political compass, both red and blue have hopped in the caravan north. And they may differ on a few issues, but we all see that they vote in the same direction. Anytime there's a war bill that comes up, it's very clear where their true allegiance lies. They differ on some kinds of spending, they differ on some kinds of social policy. But when it comes to the idea that there are limits to what the government can do, they are very clearly in agreement. And that if it should be done, it can be done, it must be done. And that is American too. The new authoritarianism that is springing forth not just in the United States, but around the world, like clearly, is a response to a desire by those who have responsibility for what happens in the world, or at least believe themselves to have responsibility for what happens in the world, to respond to an increasingly complex world. And they go, well, we need new powers, we need new authorities. Like an author of a work of fiction, right? They want to be able to dictate what happens next. And we all know from the root of that word, it's a dangerous impulse, but it is a human one. We need to recognize that. Now, what so many of us have forgotten is that what makes the United States special is how strictly limited the government was intended to be. Persuade people who are not politically aware or engaged in the world as it changes. The power of the libertarian message is that it is different from the two other parties. It does not need to be extreme, but it is radical in the Latin sense of the word, the root there being radix, which of course means the root of the issue. Radicals are simply looking at the fundamental root cause of the problem, and that is that we have replaced a limited government with an unlimited government. Libertarians, as far as I can see, are the primary political movement around the world that are looking at what is happening and trying to do something at a fundamentally governmental level to correct that influence. I think a lot of us do not express enough sort of sympathy and understanding for where the error arises from those who are in power right now. We need to do whatever we can. But we should never compromise on recognizing that that is an error, and that even if we believe it helps in the moment, it harms in the longer term history. That recognition that there is a limited government, and that is a good thing. That when the founders of the United States authored the Constitution, they made the work of government harder intentionally. They made the work of police harder intentionally. They made the act of war harder intentionally. That was for a reason. We deserve a choice. We have to recognize the space for government. We need to recognize the space for policy. But we need to recognize that beyond that domain, when we move into the domain of rights, we can permit no trespass. That is an echo of the foundational myths of America. And that is a message that I think is owned by the libertarians today. I don't want to go on forever. We should get some questions in.